Free FM.
Penn, Jillette.
Yeah, this is Penn, Jillette on the big CBS Radio Free FM. I'm sitting here with Michael Godot, and this is a very special show. This is a show I've been waiting to do since before I had a show. Before there was time to have a show. I did Fear Factor years ago. Tell and I did it. And the host is Joe Rogan, and we got along fabulously. I had such a crush on him. I just dug him. We're sitting around afterwards talking, and we're agreeing on everything. I mean, we're just going through the whole list, man. Atheist, this is BS, this is BS, boom, boom, boom. It's just this huge kind of bonding experience. Fast, funny, cool. Went to see him live. He's terrific. And then Joe says, kind of out of the blue, and of course you don't believe we landed on the moon. And I, of course, say, you mean you and me, Joe? Or do you mean humanity? And Joe says, oh, no, humanity. We didn't land. It's impossible. And then starts a relationship between me and Joe where we are getting along and loving each other, and then he sends me these videotapes that are done by mentally ill people that say absolute nonsense. So I told him, one of these days I'm going to get you with someone who can really discuss this with you. So I have here in the studio the bad astronomer, not the bad astronomer,
sure.
Phil Plait, and he has dealt with the moon landing, and the word lunatic comes up very often because of its roots. So, Joe, are you there?
Yes.
Joe is here. Phil is here. Joe, you tell us how we didn't land on the moon, and Phil will explain it back to you, okay? I also want to say, before you get going, Joe, that almost every sort of debate they ever do, like Larry King or something, they have the guy whose side the host is on is always someone with a lot of experience, and the audience is on his side, and then the guy they call in who they disagree with is some like putz who can't talk or can't do anything. We have on here someone who does like ultimate fighting, someone who is in stand-up is terrific. So in this case, the bad guy, I believe, has more skills at talking than the good guy. This is why it's going to be so great. Tell us, Joe.
Well, this is my take on it. I am not saying that I have any information that anybody else doesn't have. I'm not saying that I know that we didn't land on the moon. I'm not saying that I know that everyone's a liar. I'm not saying that it was a total hoax. All I'm saying is when I look at all of it, when I look at the photographic evidence, or I look at the fact that we haven't been back since 1972, when I look at the fact that no humans except the Apollo astronauts have ever gone through the Van Allen radiation belt, the fact that no one's even done a flyby around the moon since then, it seems weird to me. When I look at the press conference and I see Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and Michael Collins nervous and weird and obviously like being deceptive after they came back, I go, what is that? I look at all that stuff. When I look at the video footage that Bart Siebel character, who's clearly out of his mind, for sure. And so is that Renee guy. So are a lot of those guys. But sometimes, occasionally, someone who's clearly out of their mind has a point. If you can sift through all their BS and look at all the crap that they say and run it through a filter, every now and then they'll say something, oh, well, this guy's wrong about almost everything, but is he wrong about that? Now, when I look at that video and some of the video that Siebel has of them faking the distance between the Earth and the moon when they're shooting the moon, or the Earth rather, through a circular window in the lunar module, and they have the windows blacked out. They're pretending that it's deep space. They're saying that they're 130,000 miles out, and then you see them pull the window curtains down, or the shade, whatever they have covering up with the windows, and you see that they're actually in near-Earth orbit. That makes me curious. When I look at the photographs and I see intersecting shadows. Now, I'm no photographic expert. I don't know anything about the moon, really, except stuff that I've read on the Internet. I'm no scientist. But when I see intersecting shadows that seem to show some sort of a different light source, or more than one light source, it looks odd to me. When I see that those crosshairs aren't over all the images, it looks cut and cropped to me. When I look at some of the photographs of the moon, I have this gigantic coffee table book, and it's all, a NASA book, and it's beautiful pictures of the moon and all these different photographs. Well, when I look at some of them, they look obviously fake. They look cut and cropped. And I'm not saying I know they are. I'm not saying I have any special information. But I'm an open-minded person, and when I look at it, I say, look, I know I sound like a retard. I know I sound like a crackpot. I know saying that, the Earth is hollow, there's dinosaurs inside of it, I'm sure. It's very similar to saying I don't think people landed on the moon. But you know what? I don't think people landed on the moon.
Well, you just gave there's the whole argument right there. With great power, great force, great humor, and also great humility. Okay, Phil, point by point. Well, feel free to heckle him, Joe. Not that I have to tell you to.
Well, I think we're done. Now, I let Joe rant on for a while, so now it's my turn.
Okay.
All of the points you brought up there are the same ones that are brought up on all these websites. You see them all the time. And
for sure. I'm not original.
Yeah, and they're all wrong, every one of them. And it's a lot of them are a little bit tricky to describe, and some of them are pretty easy. Like this idea that no astronaut's been in the Van Allen belt. That's just wrong.
Okay, well, who's been in through the Van Allen belts and survived besides the Apollo astronauts?
Every single shuttle astronaut who has ever gone into space. The Van Allen belts are these regions of high radioactivity outside the Earth. It's caused by the Earth's magnetic field.
Right, but they start at 300 miles out, and don't all the shuttle trips go to 300 miles? That's it.
Nope, that's not right. There is a dip in the Van Allen belts over the South Atlantic. It's called the South Atlantic Anomaly. And the shuttle goes through this every 7 or so orbits. Hubble goes through it every 7 orbits. They have to shut it down, have to shut some of the instruments down because of the increased radiation. And in fact, the Gemini missions, which were the warm-ups for the Apollo, went specifically into the Van Allen belts to make sure that the astronauts could survive the radiation. So even before Apollo, astronauts had gone in, and that was into the actual Van Allen belts to make sure it worked. You could say, the shuttle astronauts, they just go into the lower bit for a few seconds. Gemini went in it, they tested it, they showed that, in fact, the radiation did not go through the spaceship very well, and the astronauts would be fine.
No, how high do the belts go at the lowest point?
I'm not sure exactly how high up the surface of the Earth the South Atlantic Anomaly is. I know it's a couple hundred miles because that's where Hubble is, 250, 270, something like that. You can look that up.
So it's basically the edge of the belt. Now, does the intensity vary between the edge of the belt and deeper into the belt? The belt lasts between, depending on who you ask. If you ask NASA, they say it's 24,000 miles. If you ask Robert Van Allen, the guy who discovered it, he says it's over 60,000 miles.
Well, it's actually James Van Allen, just to make a little point there, because that's really probably the only thing I'm going to score on you today. So what the hell? I'll go for a name.
Real guy?
I think he was an actor. He was in some sitcom. The belts are actually pretty complicated. There's an inner belt and an outer belt, and the inner belt has more radiation, the outer belt has less. And, you hear these claims, the astronauts needed 8 feet of lead to prevent them from dying from the radiation. And that's wrong, too. There's different kinds of radiation, and the kind of radiation that is in the belt is actually stopped pretty well by the insulation in the spacecraft and the suits they were wearing. There's a kind of radiation that you can stop with a piece of paper. And so a lot of people just think, radiation, we're going to die. But there's different kinds in the belt. There are different radiation in the belts, different belts. It's all very complicated.
All right, but has anyone ever gone through them?
All the way?
The Apollo astronauts?
Not all the way, but the Gemini missions went deep into the heart of them and stayed there to make sure that these guys would be in it. And the Apollo astronauts were moving very quickly because they were at the beginning of their trip when they still had all their velocity, and they only nicked sort of the inner part of the belt. They weren't in it for that long.
So if they went through 60,000 plus miles, how long would that take?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to calculate that. It would take a little while,
and
probably
it's not
hours.
Dangerous?
But they didn't go through, straight through the belt. It's not like they're driving through the heart of Kansas. They just sort of nicked the corner of it. So they were only in the belts for a few minutes. And their dosimeters...
Wait a minute. They were only in it for a few minutes, but I thought the belt circles the whole Earth.
They don't. They stop at the poles.
Yeah, so what they did is they actually launched...
So you can shoot through the poles and not touch the belt at all?
According to the drawing that I have in front of me, yes.
I think you would have to go through some of them, but there are regions where the belts are stronger and regions where they're weaker. And so it is, in fact, it's sort of a donut shape. So you can go to avoid the worst parts of it, and that's what the astronauts did. They got an elevated radiation dose, about what you and I get for living on a year on the surface. But the rest of it wasn't that bad. And so when they got back, hey, it was elevated but not lethal.
Now, what about Operation Starfish Prime? I've read about this thing where they launched a nuclear weapon up into space in order to try to blast a hole through the belts. Is that BS? What is that?
No, that was actually, there were real tests done in the 1950s and 60s where they blew up hydrogen bombs in low Earth orbit or just up above the surface of the Earth because they thought this was a good idea.
It's an art project.
And it's
That's
actually
the same government that put people on the...
But what happened was they blew these things up to see what would happen. And what happens is when you blow up a nuclear weapon, you get a very fast pulse of gamma rays. These are really high-energy light waves. And these things slam into the atmosphere, and they blast out electrons from the atoms in the atmosphere. And these things stream out really quickly, and they generate a really strong magnetic field that lasts for a fraction of a second. And this is what, you hear about this electromagnetic pulse. And it blew out electricity in a lot of places. This was over the Pacific, and actually in Hawaii, which was like hundreds of miles away, they were getting shorts, they lost power, all this kind of stuff. And the claim is that Starfish Prime, this one blast, I don't remember the date, but it was in the early 60s, fed so much radiation into the Van Allen belts that it was elevated for years. And what happened was, yes, it did have a localized effect. There was more radiation for a while, but after a while it did settle down. And I think the problem that people bring up about this is that a solar flare would do the same sort of thing, or maybe just all the nuclear testing raised the radiation level. But in fact, it just wasn't a problem. If you look at the actual levels of the radiation in there and the path the astronauts actually took, wasn't that bad.
Do they consistently monitor the levels of radiation? I mean, how do they know, like, how much damage this nuclear weapon launching into space did and how much the radiation maintains or how much stays out there?
To my knowledge, and I'm not an expert in Starfish Prime, not being a nuclear technician, they did launch probes that went into the Van Allen belts. The reason they're called the Van Allen belts is because James Van Allen built this instrument that went on the first U.S. satellite that actually detected these high levels of radiation. And that's how they discovered these things, and that's how they continue to monitor the belts. Now, of course, we have satellites up there all the time. They're radiation hardened, and they actually do measure it.
There's satellites inside the belt?
They go in and out of the belts, and there are all sorts of devices on them to measure what the local radiation levels are. It's a good thing to monitor because in the case of a solar flare, that can dump a lot of high-energy electrons and protons into the magnetic field. Now, listen, I'm talking a little scientific here. I'm hoping everybody's bearing with me. And if you're listening in your car, you may want to pull over and take notes. And so it sort of feeds the belts, and they do get stronger for a while, and that's when you get a lot of northern light activity, aurora borealis, in the northern hemisphere. So actually, it's kind of cool. You get a solar flare, you get a pretty light show, and you think, geez, if there are any astronauts up there right now, they could be in a little bit of trouble.
Now, what happens there? Now, what about solar flares that occurred supposedly, there was like a lot of solar activity and solar flares that occurred while these Apollo missions were going on. What protected those guys?
Yeah, this was kind of the suck factor in being an Apollo astronaut, is that when they launched these things, it was actually at the peak of the solar cycle. The sun has this 11-year cycle where it has a lot of activity, sunspots and solar flares and stuff like that. Right now, we're at a minimum, but back then they were actually approaching a maximum. And honestly, it was just luck that there was not a massive solar flare during the Apollo missions. There was one in between two of them that was huge. And if they had been out in space, actually outside of the Van Allen belts protect the Earth from this stuff. They catch it like a net, and they feed it down into our atmosphere where it becomes harmless. Out in space, you get hit by a solar flare like this, you're dead. And these guys could have been on the surface of the moon during a flare like that, and they would have died 250,000 miles away from home of radiation sickness, which is a horrifying way to go. So these guys are true heroes in every sense of the word. They knew what they were getting into.
So
and
it was basically a solar game of Russian roulette.
That's right. It was just probability. I guess luck is probability taken personally. I believe the large man on my right said that initially. But it was just probability that they didn't that didn't happen.
But I thought that there were some big solar flares that supposedly occurred during the Apollo mission.
There was one. You realize, of course, the missions were spread out over 3 years. They went from 69 to 72, and they only lasted about, the first one, the Apollo 11 mission was like, 3 days there. They were on the moon for a few hours. They turned around and got out of there. So that was only 1 week. The later missions lasted longer. They were about 2 weeks. And the flare that I remember reading about happened in 72. I think it was between Apollo 16 and 17. And it was just simple luck. But there weren't any massive flares during the actual missions. There's one of these moon hoax guys, Ralph Renee. I believe Penn has some experience with him. Yeah, he was on Penn's show.
The show, right.
And I believe he was treated relatively fairly, actually, on the show. You guys were really nice to him.
For sure.
I've actually been head-to-head with him, and that was quite the experience.
What about Bart Sibrel? He seems much more lucid.
You'd think, wouldn't you? Yeah. You'd be kind of wrong.
Except for the whole crazy baby Jesus stuff. I had dinner with that guy once, and it was fascinating.
Really?
Yeah. It was fascinating.
Wow, I'd love to have been sitting on that.
Yeah, I would have loved to have you there.
Yeah, I've gone head-to-head with him. Actually, Michael Shermer and I took him on a few months ago on a radio show, and that was a riot.
Oh, is there a recording of it available anywhere?
I think so. It's out there someplace. You should hear it. It's pretty funny.
I would love to hear it.
Michael was the good cop, and I was like the gadfly, like, no, you got this all wrong. Sabrell says a lot of stuff. But it really all turns out to be wrong. He's got this top 10 list of reasons we couldn't have done it, and it's all garbage. Yeah. The Russians were so far ahead of us, and it's like, well, yeah, they were up until we started kicking their butts. They were going for headlines. First rendezvous in space, first woman in space. It's like, how does the first woman in space help you get to the moon? We stuck this woman on a spaceship and put her in space. Great. That's a real engineering challenge, and so he makes these lists and stuff, and it doesn't make any sense. And he's making a lot of these same arguments, and most of them are pretty easy to show wrong.
Now, let's go through a few of the more things that Joe said. Go through
sure.
A little bit more on the list.
Spend way too much time on radiation.
I want people to know that we're talking to Joe Rogan. If you can't picture him, he was the host of Fear Factor. He's the one the government hates for making people eat bugs and destroying our culture.
The government hates me for that?
Absolutely.
Damn.
The FCC just put out a thing and said our culture is being ruined by shows where people eat bugs. Who the hell else are they talking about, Joe?
I like Fear Factor.
Put that out? The culture is being ruined by that?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. There was just a thing of a senator is trying to help television culturally and do equal time stuff, and that quote was done by the FCC. There are shows where they make people eat bugs.
That's like a syphilis and AIDS-ridden prostitute blaming her ill health on a hangnail.
Absolutely. But there's no doubt about that. But you weren't mentioned by name, but I don't know. Was 60 Minutes making people eat bugs?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't really watch 60 Minutes.
I gotta say, watching those people eat those cave spiders was one of the toughest things I have ever sat through. That was pretty hard.
That's easy stuff. The horrible stuff is the stuff that smells.
And that would be everything else.
They're just little crabs or little crustaceans, So let's go back to the thing.
Okay. Are you done with? Let's move on to radiation.
I'm radiated out. What do you got?
So that's where we are. There's no danger in the radiation. They go through the hole in the top of the donut. They're only in it for a few minutes. There's no worries whatsoever. And the only reason why other people haven't done it yet is...
Well, I wouldn't say there's no worries whatsoever. Radiation is still an issue. It's an issue on Mars missions because it's a long mission. The reason we haven't gone back isn't technical or scientific. It's political. By the end of the Apollo missions, the people weren't that interested, and NASA was already starting to gear up towards the space shuttle, which is what the government wanted, and a space station. And Apollo just started, dying off. And
everyone has been promising a return to the moon, from George Sr. to George Jr. I don't think Clinton ever promised it, but let me read to you an interesting quote that Clinton said. This is from his book. This is page 156 of his book, My Life. And he says, just a month before, he's talking about a conversation that he had with someone a month after the Apollo 11 landing. He says, just a month before, Apollo 11 astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong left their colleague Michael Collins aboard Spaceship Columbia and walked on the moon, beating by 5 months President Kennedy's goal of putting a man on the moon before the decade was out. The old carpenter asked me if I really believed it happened. I said, sure, I saw it on television. He disagreed. He said he didn't believe it for a minute that them television fellers could make things look real that weren't. Back then I thought he was a crank. During my 8 years in Washington, I saw some things on TV that made me wonder if he wasn't ahead of his time.
You mean Clinton might have said something that turned out not to be right?
Well, not to be.
You should publish this.
I understand what you're saying, but isn't that an odd thing to say for a guy who was the president, a two-term president of the United States of America? That's a weird thing to say. To even imply, even hint that possibly we didn't go to the moon.
Well, listen, Joe, We are going to take a commercial break, and we're going to keep you on board, and we're going to come back with Joe Rogan, the host of Fear Factor, against Phil Plait, the astronomer.
Hey, man, this is no battle. I'm no knowledgeable person. I know nothing. I am very honored to have this conversation.
You're
because
doing a
I
great
have
job,
questions.
Joe.
And I love Fear Factor, so there
fabulous.
you go.
This is fabulous. We'll be back. This is Michael Goudot who's saying nothing, Penn Jillette who's saying next to nothing on CBS Radio, Free FM. We'll be right back. Yeah, this is Penn Jillette, who has not been to the moon and never will go. Michael Goudot, who hasn't gotten a word in edgewise. And we have Joe Rogan, the manly host of Fear Factor. And he's got some questions. He's asking Phil Plait, the Bad Astronomy website. Let's give Phil's, what's your web address?
Yeah, let's do that. It's badastronomy.com.
That's easy.
Yeah.
And he's answering some of Joe's questions about the Apollo missions and going to the moon. And he had just given you a Clinton quote, and you'd given a snotty answer that Clinton maybe had lied.
These damn scientists always giving their snotty answers.
Snotty answers. Now, address that. Does that quote seem to make it seem like a man who was in office for 8 years and at least paying attention some of the time had some doubts about that?
You know, just because you're president doesn't make you immune to ideas that may not be true. I believe our current president is a creationist, and he may have some other wacky ideas. So the Apollo moon hoax idea has been in the popular culture.
Though, there's a massive difference between intelligent levels of our current and former president.
Oh, yeah. They're like inverse. I'll give you that.
But the other thing is that quote, Joe, even in the I don't think you took it out of context at all. That quote, the way it read when you read it, seemed to imply that he was kind of saying it perhaps with a wink. They do some amazing things on TV, talking about some other stuff you may have seen, and that does seem to have a little bit of wit to it and may not be saying clearly he doesn't believe we land on the moon. Or am I misinterpreting?
It's open to interpretation, but what concerned me is what he said was, during my 8 years in Washington, I saw some things on TV that made me wonder, meaning that he was privy to information like, I mean, we've all seen some weird deception labeled as propaganda. Like, what was that girl's name? Jessica something or other. They were trying to label as a hero during this.
Oh, yeah.
Jessica Lynch?
Yes. Yeah. Remember that? When they were saying, they had to go in and rescue her, and she was like, I was in a hospital. What are you talking about?
But there wasn't really faked footage of that, was there?
No, there was no fake footage, but, I mean, how do we know that there's not fake footage?
Well,
CNN...
if your point is that the government lies to us, and that's where this whole thing starts. So this is what makes me crazy about these things, is it is absolutely the government's fault. Joe's point is very well taken. If they're going to lie to us about this, and this, why aren't they lying about that?
Well,
anybody who's read the Warren Commission report has got to have some questions about how the government handles things.
Well, up until this current administration, I would have said, well, if the government's going to lie to us, they're going to do a much better job than they did with the moon hoax conspiracy. I got to throw that one out the window now. But look, maybe Clinton was looking at his own footage of trying to find what is. But look, I'll grant, maybe he's talking about the moon hoax. Maybe he's saying, maybe we did do that or not. Smart people can believe things that are dumb. We see this all the time. Even, the smartest people in the world, they're Nobel laureates who go out and promote stuff like homeopathy and all kinds of garbage. And so, I'm not saying you have to be dumb to believe in the moon hoax. Not at all. I know a lot of smart people who have questions about it. Like, the parallel shadows and stuff like that.
You can be, things on the list.
And I'll admit, I'm not going to say I'm necessarily a smart guy, but some of the stuff had me baffled. Now, you mentioned intersecting shadows.
Yes.
Now, on the Fox Moon Hoax show, which came out in 2001, they specifically used the phrase shadows intersect. They were actually using footage of Bart Sibrel, probably the leading moon hoax promulgator these days, and he said the shadows intersect. Now, I will tell you right now, if you can show me a picture where two shadows on the moon are physically intersecting, then I don't know what I'll do.
Well,
You'll have shown me up. Yes, I'll kiss Penn on the mouth. Yeah.
You might want to do that anyway. I don't know what your motives are.
Joe's done that anyway.
Yeah, okay.
So.
But it's fun.
He's just ahead of you.
But that's the word that Sabrell used, and in fact, shadows don't intersect.
Well,
shadows
they don't intersect physically, but they are going in intersecting directions.
Yes, the shadows appear to converge. They appear to be looking like they're pointing in two different directions. You can think of it that way.
It would appear to be like from two different light sources.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. However, if there were two different light sources, you'd see two different shadows coming off of every object. So you can be pretty sure that's not what's going on. A better argument might be that if there were a light on the set, a nearby light, the shadows might appear to point in two different directions because of the angles. But in fact, shadows are non-parallel here on the Earth all the time, and you never see it. The reason for this, the reason they look non-parallel is simply perspective. It's the same thing that if you're standing in a set of railroad tracks, the railroad tracks appear to converge on the horizon, but you know the railroad tracks are parallel. They gotta be, or else the railroad can't run on them. It's the same thing. You have two objects sitting on the lunar surface. Typically one is nearby and one is far away, and that provides you a sense of perspective. Both shadows are in fact parallel, but because of perspective, they look like they're pointing in two different directions. You can actually find this on the web. If you look up, moon hoax parallel shadows in Google, you will find these.
That stuff.
I've taken pictures myself. I talk about this. I give a talk about the moon hoax. I show pictures of lampposts in a park across the street from my house where the shadows are not even close to being parallel. Some of them are pointing right and some of them are pointing left, but they all appear to converge on the horizon, what's called the vanishing point, right? This thing you learn about in art class.
Right.
And so that's what's going on here. And it actually, you can be really fooled by this. And I will say that when I first heard this argument, I went, those shadows aren't parallel. And it took me a few minutes to go, I get it. And then it made sense to me. But you see it all the time. You never notice it. Go outside if it's a sunny day. Pick two trees, and you'll see that the shadows, it's amazing. Everybody I talked about this, they go out and they go, wow, I never noticed that before. It's amazing what's in front of your face your whole life that you just don't notice.
Well, I'll have to check that out. I've never really looked into it other than looking at the pictures on the Internet and going,
Sure, we can leave this one open, but...
Now, what about all those hot spots? It looks like there's like a light source behind people.
I was hoping you wouldn't bring this up. Not because it's a good point, but because it's really hard to explain without images. But basically, the argument goes, if you look at the Apollo astronauts, some of them look like they're standing in a spotlight, like there's somebody literally standing there with a spotlight beaming a circle of light on these guys. And this is actually a fairly complicated physical effect. It's got a German name. It's called Heiligenschein. And basically, it is, how to explain this on the radio, right? Part of it has to do with the fact that when you're looking straight down the beam of light, when you're looking there are no shadows on the ground there. If you look off to the side, you see an object's shadow stretching behind it. But if you have a light shining on your head and you turn around and look at the shadow of your head, the light looks very bright there. It's a spotlight effect. I have pictures of this, actually, that I've taken in the infield of a baseball diamond. The dust has this peculiar property that it sort of throws light back in the direction it comes. So if you look at your own shadow, you're sort of seeing the sunlight reflecting off of the ground there stronger than around you. See, again, and people are in their cars thinking, this scientist guy is nuts. He's not making any sense. But this is what's going on. And in fact, if you get up early in the morning and there's dew on the grass and the sun is shining, you can actually see what looks like a soft glow around your head as you're walking down the street, and it looks like a halo around your head. It's really cool.
When's the last time you're up early in the morning, Joe?
Yeah, that's probably a bad point. I'm sorry.
Well, I go to bed sometimes early in the morning.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, there you go. So next time you're like slouching home, give that one a shot.
I'm planning to do in Vegas.
Yeah, man. But you know what? It works in dust really well. And it's really cool because I've got pictures of myself like that where I took a camera, turned around from the sun on this baseball infield, and there is a strong glow around my head. I love showing this when I give talks. But that's what the spotlight effect is.
So it's just dust and the sun and the shadow.
Yeah.
It's a visual anomaly.
Yeah,
Or
it's
an
like
effect?
like an optical illusion, like a halo
Okay.
around the sun or something like that. It really is just that. It's really cool.
All right. Now, recently, the Apollo 15 landing site has been spotted. They believe that
yeah.
You've seen that?
Yeah, that was cool. It wasn't. People say this isn't proof we landed on the moon. It's like, well, no, it isn't. But basically, when the Apollo missions landed, they disturbed the dust around them. And there's this mission called Clementine. It was a military mission that orbited the moon and took a lot of pictures. And I'm pretty sure it was a Clementine picture that just shows like a little spot on the moon, but it's right where Apollo 15 was. Now, those of us who know we landed on the moon looked at that and went, "Oh, cool!" And those of us who maybe have their suspicions are like, "Look, it's a smudge on the moon."
Yeah,
and
but
I'll go
here's
either
my
way on
question.
that.
Here's my question about that.
Sure.
If there's this big smudge they can see from Clementine, how come when you look at any photos of the lunar module, the lander, there's no blast crater whatsoever? That was like a big point with a lot of the hoax theorists too. The hoax theorists were saying that all the initial images of that NASA had drawn before the Apollo launches all show that there was going to be a big blast crater. There's that famous drawing that what is his name? The guy that does all those old
Chesley Bonestell.
No. I'm sorry. He's a guy that has those old friendly paintings that you always see of like a guy giving a kid an apple and everyone's smiling.
Norman Rockwell.
Rockwell. Yeah, Norman Rockwell actually has a painting of an Apollo astronaut climbing out of one of the lunar modules, and he's standing in this gigantic blast crater. But if you look at any of the photographs of the lunar module, there's no blast crater whatsoever. So which one is it? Is there a blast crater from the lunar module, or is there no blast crater? And if there's no blast crater, then how can this Apollo 11 photograph from Clementine show a blast crater when you look at the clear, very clear photographs, the close-ups of the lunar module shows no blast crater whatsoever?
Well, I'm going to have to call Norman Rockwell's alma mater and make sure they take away his aeronautical engineering degree.
It's not just
That's
Norman
a good
Rockwell,
point.
It's all the old photographs from NASA, or all the old drawings from NASA.
Before they'd gone to the moon, they weren't sure exactly what it was going to be like. And if you look at Chesley Bonestell's the artist I mentioned, he's the one who really, with Werner von Braun, popularized this idea of going back to the moon. His paintings are totally cool. But when you look at the landscapes that he drew versus the landscapes that are there, they're different. We had this idea of what the moon was going to look like that didn't turn out to be right. And so, in some of these paintings, they show this huge flame coming out of the bottom of the lunar lander as well.
Right.
But that's not true. There is no big giant flame like that. They used a fuel which didn't make a big flame. You couldn't see it. So the drawings weren't that accurate. Now, when they landed, there was not a blast crater, and this is a big theory. The conspiracy theories, they say there was 10,000 pounds of thrust coming out of the bottom of this thing, and it should have, 5 tons should have blown out this huge hole. Well, yeah, it was 10,000 pounds of thrust at maximum thrust, but in fact, as they were landing, they throttled down. I mean, you don't blast out of your garage at 80 miles an hour.
There's no blast crater is the point, but yet this photograph from Clementine supposedly is a blast crater.
Right. Well, or I shouldn't say right. I should say yes. That was part of the point you were making. So the thrust wasn't as big, and it was spread out over a big area, so it didn't make a blast crater. What the Apollo 15 landing site image from Clementine is showing is not a blast crater. It's where the dust is disturbed. Clementine was a mission to map out. It had a lot of. It was actually what they call a technology tester. They used a lot of off-the-shelf stuff to make cheap detectors, and they were doing a lot of stuff with it. But one of the things it did, it was mapping out the minerals on the surface of the moon, which is something you need to know if there's going to be something you need when you're going to go back, like supply of oxygen or titanium or whatever. So they did this mineralogical map. I am a scientist, not a linguist, and I have a hard time with some big words. But it did that, and so what it's actually mapping is a disturbance in the surface, not really a crater. So you can imagine you could go out to let's use the baseball diamond analogy again. You go to the infield, you can run your hand over the dust and make a disturbance in the dust without making a crater. That's what was seen. It's just where the dust was pushed away.
I'm looking at the photograph. I've seen the photo, but it's a very, very big disturbance. Now, when you look at the sites, though, and you look at under the lunar module, you see nothing. You see no disturbance whatsoever. So which one is it? Is it a big disturbance or is it no disturbance?
Hold on a second, Joe. We're going to take another break. We're going to come back and get that answer. You sure have questions, Joe. Now, you got to say, Joe knows his stuff.
Yes, he does.
You know, and how many papers you got in front of you, Joe? You doing this off the top of your head?
I'm doing most of it off the top of my head, but I did have a couple of photographs that I saved.
This is great, Joe. Thanks so much. We're going to be back with Joe Rogan, host of Fear Factor, and who has some questions about whether we landed on the moon, and Phil Plait, the bad astronomer. And this is Michael Goudot, who's trying to keep up on the computer, and Penn Jillette on Free FM, CBS Radio. Yeah, this is Penn Jillette, Free FM, CBS Radio. He's with Michael Goudot. Let's get right back into it. We have Joe Rogan, the host of Fear Factor, and someone who's done an incredible amount of research about the moon landing and whether it happened or not. And we have Phil Plait, the bad astronomer from badastronomy.com. And the question you just asked was, if you're going to try to see it with the Clementine, there's a heck of a lot of dust. And it sure didn't seem that in the pictures that
there's a large dark spot in the Clementine photographs that they're using to represent the area where Apollo 15 supposedly landed.
You know, that dark spot, as I recall, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think that dark spot is a false color. It might even be a negative because
it's a photograph. I mean, it's pretty clear. I don't think it's a negative. I
don't think Clementine actually had an optical imager. I might be wrong on that. I don't know if it had a camera like that, but it was sensitive to different types of minerals. And so it looks like a photograph, but I'm not sure that it's a photograph in that if you were flying over the moon right there, you would see a dark spot where it saw a dark spot. You would see a disturbance in the surface. And what they did is when they landed, the rocket exhaust from the lander was pushing the dust around. So directly underneath the lander, the dust was blown outwards, sort of in a radial pattern, just out in 360 degrees in every direction. And it went a long way. It was carried out by the force of the thrust. And so over a large area, there was a disturbance in the dust, but it was really only cleared out directly below the lander because there's no air on the moon. And if you take a blow dryer and blow it into like a pile of baking powder or something like that, you get all the curlicues and it makes a huge disturbance and all that. But without that air to carry the dust on the moon, it really only just blew straight out and left sort of a hole under the lander directly underneath it.
Right, but this brings us back to the initial point. There was no hole under the lander.
I mean, a hole in the
lander,
dust.
There's absolutely nothing. There's no disturbance whatsoever.
I mean,
there's no dust on the pads. It's flat and smooth. It looks like it's completely undisturbed.
That's right. It is disturbed because there was dust there that got blown out. There's no crater.
But this is 1994 that Clementine circled, correct?
Something like that. Yeah, it was
1994. So we're talking about 20-plus years?
Are you expecting
20-plus years, and that's what's left?
The wind is going to blow the dust back? No, you mean that's what's left of what?
20-plus years later, there's this gigantic disturbance in this area that gets pelted by micrometeorites every day of the week.
The surface of the moon is actually billions of years old. There's the dust and everything there, but there's not. I mean, micrometeorites they don't change the surface that quickly.
What about meteorites themselves? I mean, don't we get hundreds of meteorites a day? I mean, how can they possibly see a spot that's 20 years old from something that, if you look at the photographs, made no blast crater at all? It made no disturbance whatsoever. Yet 20-plus years later, they can find this spot?
Well,
how do they find the spot? It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, we know where they landed. I mean,
I know that we know where they landed, but we have very clear photographic evidence of the lunar module sitting on the surface of the moon with no disturbance. Yet you can see this somehow or another, this invisible disturbance from space 20 years later. That seems a little weird.
No. I'm not saying that there's no disturbance on the surface. I'm saying there's no blast crater. The dust was removed from that spot.
The lunar module. It looks
so
like
what am I missing?
Happened.
Okay, what he keeps asking over and over again.
And what I'm not hearing.
Let's all get into this. Come on.
I don't know why. Maybe stating it will help because he said it okay. He is saying that there is not a discernible blast crater. You've explained why there isn't. And then he's saying, but then you turn around and say, on the Clementine images, we see a disturbance. How come we can't see the disturbance at the time it happened, and yet we can see it 20-plus years later?
A large disturbance 20-plus years later.
Okay. It seems to me that the moon is basically a rock covered by 2 feet of chocolate powder. And if you blow off the powder, you get down to rock. And there's not a blast crater in the rock. But you have blown away all of the chocolate powder.
Michael is precisely right, and he has concisely said what was I was really stumbling over.
Yes,
that's my moon. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm here to release some breaking NASA news.
I mean, you see this image; it looks like a crater.
It's not. It's just where the dust got blown around and mixed up.
But it doesn't look like there's any dust blown around or anything happens whatsoever to the very clear, high-resolution photographs of underneath the lunar module.
Yeah, why can't we see the dust disturbance at the time, but only 20
We don't see
years
nothing. You see nothing. It looks exactly the same.
No. If you actually look at a lot of the pictures, well, of course, you can't take a picture of the landing spot before they landed. We don't have that technology, so we only have pictures after the lunar lander was there. And when you look under the landers, you can see sort of these black radial streaks from the surface being scorched a little bit by the.
I don't see that anywhere.
That's in one of the pictures, I believe. I've seen it.
I've looked at every single one of them. I've never seen anything even remotely close to that.
I might be wrong, but I do know that the dust was blown out from underneath these things, and without air. Our sort of common sense ideas of how things behave on the moon get a little confused. And so you don't get dust billowing up in the air and then settling down in the pads, for example. It just blows straight out. By the time the lander actually touched down, the exhaust had been blowing out the dust for several seconds.
Okay, but if that's true, then how come it didn't work like with the lunar rovers? The lunar rovers, the dust kicked up in the air and came down the same way it would if it was on Earth. The only difference being that it came down slower, presumably because of the 1/6 Earth's gravity.
Actually, this is, wow, if we were confused before, this is going to be great. The rovers were actually, they would drive off away from the lander, so there was still dust relatively undisturbed on the surface. And when the wheels would kick up the dust, what's really interesting is that if you think about it, if you were to drive through a big pile of dust on the Earth with your car, what would you see? Well, the big particles, the pebbles and stuff, would go up and come down, and that would be it. But the finer stuff would billow up, and you get these big dust clouds.
Right.
You see that in movies all the time where somebody peels out, right, and there's this huge dust cloud. You don't see that with the rover. You see all the dust goes up and it goes down, a beautiful parabolic arc.
The same way it would if it was dirt on Earth.
But it would have to be like gravel on the Earth, because the stuff on the surface of the moon is, I've actually heard it described as like cocoa powder. It has that sort of very fine powdery texture, talcum or actually gunpowder, and it's the particles themselves are like grains of sand, but they're extremely small.
It doesn't look like cocoa powder. It looks like dirt. It looks like dirt that's played at half speed. That's what it looks like.
Well, it's kind of hard to tell from a distance.
Have you seen video of the lunar module, the rover sped up when they're driving? It looks like it's driving on dirt. The dirt kicks up and it falls down, just like it would if you were going four-wheeling in Kentucky.
Well, in fact, if you speed up the video on the Apollo astronauts, to me it does not look real. It looks like they're moving at the correct speed, things falling at the correct speed, but if you look at their arms and their legs, it looks like they're moving really quickly.
No, it doesn't. I've seen the video of them doing it at double speed. When they talk about them walking on the surface of the moon, that the 1/6 gravity made them move slower, but what it really was, like the hoax people think that it's half speed, that if you speed it up double, it looks like they're moving around normal speed. Their arms don't look like they're moving fast at all. It looks like they're moving like a guy in a spacesuit in Earth gravity, just kind of hopping around on the surface of dirt. It looks like the same exact gravity.
Well, I'm just going to have to agree to disagree with you here, because I've seen that video, and if you speed up the stuff by...
I've seen that video hundreds of times obsessively.
So have I, in fact, because I've been debunking guys like you, so I have to do this.
They don't look like their arms are moving fast at all.
Oh, I think it is. When you speed it up 2 times, I think, you see them walking around and doing stuff. It looks kind of like cartoons, like old 1930s thing.
I completely disagree.
Okay, well, the audience will have to make up their own minds, I think.
Do a search and take a look at that.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, they're not even leaving the surface of the moon more than like a few inches.
Yeah. They were wearing these big, heavy spacesuits in the backpack.
Right. Okay, which brings us to the future. Which brings us to future landings where they filmed more elaborate, high color videos of them on the moon, where all of a sudden they can jump like 16, 20 feet. They can jump in great distances. Now, what's that about?
I will give you...
where it looks like they're doing flying, crouching tiger, hidden dragon crap.
I will give you $1 million right now if you can show me video of an astronaut jumping 20 feet on the moon.
Not in the air. I'm not talking about in the air. They're jumping distances. And it might not be 20 feet. I'm
$1 million right now. For anybody who shows me video from Apollo, 20 feet.
You haven't seen video of them making great jumps?
No. They've jumped. The best they would do is skip around. They tried doing some jumps and they kept falling down. And the problem is the spacesuit has this big backpack on it, which makes them really off balance. And they kept falling, trying to do normal stuff. It was really hard for them to do stuff.
Well, that's another point, because I've seen some video where they fall down and they catch themselves with their legs up in the air, where it looks like they're being suspended on wires.
Well, yeah, they're in lower gravity, and so they bounce funny.
But why would they, even if they bounce funny, why would it look like they're suspended on wires, like they're being suspended from a point on their back where their legs kick up and then automatically come back down? I've seen video of them like righting themselves where they're literally, their whole body is pitched 45 degrees forward and they manage to right themselves. It looks like they're on wires.
Joe, this has been astonishing. We've done the whole hour.
No, we haven't even started.
I can't even rebut you. I mean, come on.
You have held your own, man. You know this stuff.
We haven't even got to the juicy stuff yet.
Email me.
We will bring you.
Give me a call. I'll give you my number. Call me.
All right, please do.
That's Joe Rogan. We're back with Penn, Jillette. Goodbye. Yeah, this is Penn, Jillette on the Free FM, CBS Radio, sitting here in the Vintage Nude Studio with Michael Goudeau and a very special guest. A while ago, we had Phil Plait, the bad astronomer, on to argue with Joe Rogan about landing on the moon. Discuss with Joe Rogan about landing on the moon. And I really thought that Joe didn't have a chance because, he was wrong and stuff. And then Joe came in with this perfect combination of aggression and humility that seemed to be almost unbeatable. A real kind of honest, looking for the truth coupled with very, very quick thinking and a lot of knowledge. And we didn't feel that the discussion about landing on the moon was over. So now we have Joe Rogan live in the studio.
Well, I hope you got some extra time, because it's not going to be over today either.
Okay.
It's going to go on for years. I'm going to haunt you, Phil.
The last thing Joe Rogan said was, "I'm not done with you, bitch." So he's not done. We have Phil on the phone. We won't put these two in the same room.
Yeah, man. How come you're ducking me, bro? I flew all the way to Vegas.
I don't want to hurt you, Joe.
So I guess since Joe started last time on the phone with explaining his questions about
what I want to say to anybody who is listening to this who's like...
And we're starting with Joe again.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm just going to... A disclaimer. I will let you start for sure.
No,
I'm not going to make any points.
I'm ready for you.
All I'm saying, and all I said before is, I am not claiming to be a scientist. I am not claiming to be anybody who's got any secret knowledge. I'm not claiming that I know something you don't. All I'm saying is I'm not afraid of looking ridiculous, and I think a lot of people are. And I think when you look at all this evidence, a lot of people look at it and they go, well, of course we landed on the moon, and they don't want to look any further, and they stop right there. What I'm saying is the more I look at stuff, the more I see inconsistencies. I see all kinds of weird behavior from the astronauts. I see all sorts of weird photographic anomalies. I saw all sorts of weird stuff with radiation. There's a lot of weird stuff. And one of the reasons why I wanted to come on the radio with you is because I wanted to be able to ask someone about these things, because all I'm getting is what I'm getting online. And I know you run a debunking website, right? I mean, Is that what you do for a living?
That would be badastronomy.com for all of you in front of a computer. No, I don't do it for a living, actually. I create educational activities for students. Actually.
Have you ever worked for NASA, or are you employed by them in any way?
Not officially. I worked at Goddard Space Flight Center for a few years, which is a NASA center, but I was a contractor. I worked for a company, not NASA. I've never been a civil servant.
And
Bart Sabrell, one of these big moon hoax guys, he went on the air once and accused me of having a NASA paycheck, which is not true. I've never had a NASA paycheck. And then a couple of years ago, I went back to Goddard after I stopped working there about 5 years ago. A couple of years ago, I went back to give a talk, and they reimbursed me, and I actually had a NASA check with my name on it. I thought, oh, damn, you got me now.
Now, Phil, last time, Joe called up and just kind of said the stuff that was troubling him about the moon landing. Since you're on the phone this time, you're going to go first, which I believe is the harder position that Joe did last time. And just tell us to start out why you think what the big signs are that we landed on the moon.
Right. This is a funny position to be in because, say, prove that this happened. It was like, how do you do that? How do I prove that you exist? I can't even do that. You're just a voice on the other end. So it's, you have to just sort of say at some point there's overwhelming evidence that this stuff really happened. It'd be silly to deny it at that point. And I think with the moon landings, you're sort of in that category. And that is, we have all the pictures. We have all the people who worked on it. We have all the historical documentation. And what's going to happen is in any project of this magnitude, and I mean this was one of the largest projects ever undertaken. There were, I've heard different estimates, but something like 400,000 people involved with it. And that there are going to be things that you're going to scratch your head over and say, how could this possibly have happened? Typically that stuff just comes into, why did somebody behave this way? Why did that sort of thing happen? In the case of the moon hoax, the people on the other side, if I can say that, they have what they call, the photographs and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about that before. We can get into that again if we want. But the question is then, what is it that I can present? And one of the things is that there is hard physical evidence of this. For example, the astronauts over the course of 6 missions brought back 800 pounds of rocks and dust from the moon. And this stuff is really weird. I mean, it's clearly not formed on the Earth. You can go through all the scientific analysis and say, yes, this stuff clearly was formed in a low-gravity, waterless environment. It has all of the telltale signs of having spent time in an atmosphereless, does that even make sense, an airless environment. This stuff's been looked at by scientists from all over the world, and they all look at it and say, yeah, that's from the moon.
All right, can I stop you right there for a second?
Yeah, sure, let's go.
That. First of all, Wernher von Braun went to Antarctica in 1967 in the height of the moon race and collected moon rocks from Antarctica. Isn't that true? Like hundreds of pounds.
I have heard...
There's photographs of him. There's videos of him there. There's moon rocks that they brought back. There's video of them carrying stuff back. He went in 1967, 2 years before Apollo.
I have not seen the documentation for this, and I've looked around, but I haven't.
You haven't seen the photographs of him in Antarctica? You haven't seen? I mean, that's very clear. That's all over the place.
Are they online? I can look that up.
Absolutely. I can't believe you don't know that. You don't. Well, you haven't heard that argument that Wernher von Braun was in Antarctica? Why would he go to Antarctica in the middle of the most heated technological race in human history, and he's at the helm of it for the United States of America, and he's going to Antarctica and he's bringing back rocks?
I've heard this story too, but I've honestly I have not found a lot of stuff about this. And
that's ridiculous. It's all over the internet. It's all over everywhere. It's been documented. I've seen videos. All over the. No, not conspiracy sites. It's all over legitimate sites. I've seen it on a bunch of different sites. It's documented. Wernher von Braun was in Antarctica in 1967, 2 years before Apollo. And he was bringing back rocks.
Okay, then
not only that, he was a Nazi. A huge, evil Nazi war criminal who, by the way, the Simon Wiesenthal Center said would be prosecuted for crimes against humanity if he was alive today, for sure.
He worked for the Nazis. I don't think he was a Nazi. That's a whole
Wernher von Braun ran a rocket factory where they hung the 5 slowest workers a day in front of the rocket factory. There's people that have talked about it. There's guys that have showed their tattoos and discussed it. And seen Wernher von Braun walk by as they were working.
Von Braun. Just to jump in here, totally separate from any moon hoax site, I just pulled up with a quick search many pictures of Wernher von Braun in Antarctica.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that you would dispute that. I don't understand.
No, I'm not disputing it. As a matter of fact, here, now that I see one here, there is actually a picture of von Braun in Antarctica on the Marshall Space Flight Center site, which is a NASA site. So it says this photo was made on or about January 7th, 1967. Well, then I have a question for you. If they were to fake the moon landings and there were some people in there and that were going to do this, why would they send von Braun to Antarctica? Why would they take pictures of von Braun? And then why would they say, look, von Braun went to Antarctica? Why even do that? If this is going to be a secret thing and you're going to go to Antarctica to collect rocks, it doesn't make sense to send your rocket.
There's a lot of things that don't make sense, but the fact is he was in Antarctica. He did bring back moon rocks.
They brought back some meteorites
from the moon.
They didn't bring. I don't think they brought back hundreds of pounds.
They brought back hundreds of pounds. If you find it, it's available all over the place.
Okay, well, I'm just going to have. Okay, I'll just grant you that. There are
But isn't that weird? Doesn't that seem weird to you? That first of all, they would lie to the public and they have this evil Nazi running the United States of America's space program. And 2 years before we go to Apollo 11, 2 years before that, this guy's in Antarctica collecting rocks from the moon.
Well, what does his being a Nazi have to do with anything?
Well, they're lying, first of all. They're bringing back this evil criminal from Germany, and they're having him work for America. They're slicking his hair back and making him look nice in a suit, and this guy's an evil piece of crap.
It was never really hidden that he was a Nazi. I think it was downplayed because he worked for...
come on, man. They did not admit that Werner von Braun was a Nazi.
I'm not going to say he was a Nazi. I know he worked for the Nazis at Pina Mundi.
You denied it.
I denied what?
You denied that he was a Nazi.
When he first said Nazi, you denied it. So you didn't say... You said no one denied it.
I don't mean to say that he's not a Nazi or is a Nazi. I'm saying that I don't know if he was a Nazi.
Well, I'm saying he's a Nazi.
Nazis for sure.
I'm saying he's a Nazi.
At their rocket plant, he was building rockets for the Nazis. The V-2, which was used to bomb London.
Well, dude, he wore the Nazi uniform. Machine. What do you have to do to be a Nazi? Do you have to have video of you cutting a Jew's head off? What do you have to do?
No, but there were Jews who were working in the rocket plant too. They weren't Nazis, and they were working.
They were slaves, dude. This guy wasn't a slave. He was at the head of the program.
I'm saying that von Braun's history is, well, I don't think it's that clear over whether he agreed with Hitler. I don't think he did.
Are you a von Braun apologist?
No.
This is getting weirder and weirder.
But what you're doing is you're sort of poisoning the well here. You're calling him a Nazi.
No. What I'm doing is I'm pointing out that the government did something really evil. They brought back a criminal, a horrible person, and they had him run America's space program.
Well, they rescued
That's a horrible lie.
They rescued all of these rocket scientists and brought them to America, and they were all really, really happy to leave, from what I've read.
Well,
they were not
because they were going to get nuked.
There with the Nazis.
It was either get nuked, get killed in war, or come over and live nice in Cape Canaveral.
But it doesn't matter. The point is...
That does matter. That's a huge point.
Oh, I don't agree. I think, what his history was...
How could you not agree that doesn't show massive amounts of deception on the part of the United States government?
The U.S. government has massive amounts of deception every day. It doesn't mean that everything they do is
that's part of my whole point. Let's move off the Nazi thing. We got Phil Plait, who's from badastronomy.com, and we have Joe Rogan, who's the host of Fear Factor, one of my favorite comedians. Have you ever seen Joe live, Phil, while you're at it?
Not live, no. I've seen some clips.
One of the best stand-ups
I've
ever seen. Fabulous. And he just is just shocking me to death, because when he first talked about this moon landing thing, I thought it was a weird little quirk that he had. He just knows so goddamn much about it.
Well, here's the thing, man. I'm not crazy, but I just want to explain this. I don't look for stuff like this. I didn't want this to come up. I'm not like the guy who's trying to find, I see all sorts of retarded arguments in these conspiracy theorists. I see them left and right. I see retarded arguments in any kind of conspiracy, whether it's 9/11 or who shot Kennedy, or it's the driver he turned around. There's all sorts of retarded stuff, but there's stuff that makes sense, and you can't throw it all out. And when you look at it all, when you look at the giant picture, there's so much wrong with the Apollo missions. There's so much wrong. Massive amounts of stuff that doesn't make sense. And that's why I'm a busy person. I'm not looking into this because I'm bored. I'm looking into this because I was really disturbed. I mean, and the deeper I went, the more I realized there's something really wrong going on here.
Okay, so we covered the
moon rocks.
Moon rocks.
No, we got an explanation. We have a plausible explanation for moon rocks.
We got a little sidetracked with the whole Nazi thing.
Yeah, you did. So let's go on with the moon rocks.
The arguments against von Braun, that you brought up, that von Braun went to Antarctica. Why would you send your rocket scientist there?
I don't know, but he was there. I don't know, but he was there, and he brought back rocks.
Second of all, he was there in 1967 or 1968.
67.
It wasn't until 1969 that Japanese scientists first identified Antarctica as having a lot of meteorites. So it doesn't make sense that if he went there 2 years before it was even understood that meteorites went there. I don't know why he went there. I don't think it was to pick up meteorites. And even if he did, that wouldn't have been enough time for them to prepare these rocks and get them to
How do
make
you know
it look
that?
like. Neil Armstrong put them up. There's not enough time because the rocks that come from the moon look very different than the lunar meteorites that are found on the surface of the Earth.
Right, but didn't the Soviet Union bring back lunar meteorite samples, and didn't they do it with an unmanned craft? And didn't the samples that the United States government sent out for independent verification, those are very small samples, tiny, sugar cube sized?
No, you can get bigger slices than that. And you can,
but where are they? You know it's a federal crime to be in possession of moon rocks? Why do you think that would be?
Because there's only 800 pounds of them, and it costs $35 billion to get them. If you want to examine bigger ones, you have to go to NASA to do that, where they've got these things stored in very, very scientifically controlled conditions.
Have you been to NASA where they have them? Have you been there?
Oh, man, no.
I have.
They don't let flunkies like me in there. They let real geologists.
Just so you know, they let me in.
Well,
I was in there in the bunny suit and the whole deal. It was
That's right.
pretty awesome.
I don't think this proves anything either way, but what I am saying is that any government that'd be willing to lie about having a Nazi run their space program, I think they'd be willing to lie about moon rocks.
I don't think anybody lied about him being a Nazi. I think that it was public knowledge. I think everybody knew it. I think they said this is the best rocket scientist in the world, and we should damn well take advantage of the fact.
Was it public knowledge to the American public?
I believe it was.
Oh,
I think they may have downplayed it. I don't think they lied about it, but I can't say either way. But the point is, the meteorites look different that came from the meteorites that come from Antarctica look different than the moon rocks. They re-entered through the Earth's atmosphere, and so they have
the ones that have been independently independently verified.
The Russians did bring back. They had a sample return mission. I think it was Zond 5. It was one of their missions that went to the moon and brought back. It was like 100 grams. It was a very, very small sample because it's hard to bring back a lot. And chemically and all of that, they were identical to, or at least close enough to what was found on the moon. And they're different than what's found on the Earth. And you got to realize too, it's not just NASA apologists, if you want to say that, who have looked at these samples. These have been sent all over the world, and people have looked at them and said, yes, we can see that these things did not form on the Earth, so they must have formed on the moon.
Right, but isn't it possible that they could have done this with unmanned probes just like the Russians did?
Well, you're arguing.
I think at some point you're stretching it so far.
Joe,
at that point, it's like it's just easier to send a guy there and pick him up.
Right, but
I'm arguing two things.
Joe's arguing 2 points, and that's one of the things Joe's doing is he's just asking questions. On the one hand, you're saying the moon rocks could have been entirely faked, and on the other hand, you're saying
Wernher von Braun was in Antarctica collecting moon rocks.
Right, but you're also saying they could have been picked up by unmanned.
Either one is a possibility.
But those are mutually exclusive.
They are mutually exclusive, and both of them do cancel out the absolute proof that moon rocks came from the moon.
Well, I think you could find several thousand geologists from all over the world, including countries who have no reason to support America, who look at these things and say they're legitimate.
Maybe.
And von Braun was in Antarctica before. And Van Braun was in Antarctica before it was known that there were meteorites in Antarctica.
Well, before
why was he collecting meteorites, though? Before the Japanese knew? Is that absolutely... Were the Japanese the first to discover it, and was it a big thing, or was it thought about that beforehand? I mean, was it something that was previously assumed?
At that point, I don't know the details of that sort of level.
Well, then there's no argument about the Japanese being the first to discover it, because it was previously assumed, and they just had to go there and find them. Then maybe the Japanese were the first to verify it? That's not good enough.
I'm just thinking about that. This is a direction of argument that I've never really considered before.
Well, that seems odd.
I can't give you any more details because I don't know the story about.
Okay, but either way, I'm saying that's not proof enough. That's not proof positive.
But I think at some point you just have to say, Wernher von Braun going to Antarctica to collect these is ridiculous. You have a high-profile guy. It's public knowledge. He's going there. Pictures on the NASA site.
I'll tell you what's ridiculous. Wernher von Braun going to Antarctica in the middle of the moon race.
I don't know.
That's
participated in an expedition to see what it was like. I mean, they traveled all over the world in different conditions to see what things were like there. So.
I believe that if you're going to plan a gigantic deception such as this, you do it in advance. And I think it's entirely possible, if you wanted to look at it from that point of view, that they were doing that. And again, I'm not saying that they did it. I'm not saying that they faked anything. I have zero idea.
The biggest dog you have to get
even
the rocks.
Even if you do that, though, it just doesn't hold water.
Brown to get the rocks.
Maybe you would.
Yeah, you
Who knows? Maybe he wanted to go. Maybe he's hands-on. Maybe he wanted to be there. Maybe he insisted. Who knows? There's no argument either way.
Nah, you'd send some guy.
No. You don't know who you would send. You don't know his personality. You don't know what he's like. You don't know what he insists on. He could have.
Once again, the moon discussion between Phil and Joe is astonishing to me. It just goes so much different than I think it's going to. It gets such weird bounces. We're going to do more
because
of that.
You thought I was crazy.
I thought you were completely crazy.
But it makes sense.
The way you're holding your own is breathtaking. It's just
you don't have to be crazy to believe in the moon hoax theory. It just helps. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back. We have Joe Rogan, the host of Fear Factor, great stand-up. Terrific guy. We have Phil Plait, also a terrific guy. And this is the definition of the marketplace of ideas here with Penn Jillette on CBS Radio Free FM. CBS Radio Free FM. I'm Penn Jillette. Mike Guido is also here. Let's get right to it as quickly as we can. Joe Rogan from Fear Factor asking questions of Phil Plait about landing on the moon. Did we do it or didn't we do it? Joe's just got questions. What's the next thing you want to open up? Who wants to take it? Phil, what other evidence would you say says we've landed on the moon? Well, a couple of big things, and the problem with most conspiracies is that you kind of pick away at the details, but you kind of forget the big picture. Like the fact that there were 400,000 people working on this Apollo mission, and if it had been faked, if it had been faked because, and you have to ask yourself why would they fake it, and then generally it's because. And there was no way they could engineer these rockets. They couldn't go through the Van Allen belts. They couldn't go to the moon, whatever. These engineers knew what they were doing. These were the best, and I mean the best people that the U.S. could find. And if they were building machines that could not perform the way they wanted them to, they would have known it. If the rocket wouldn't have been able to get to the moon, they would have known it. If they couldn't have landed on the moon, they would have known it. The radiation issue is the same thing. And so it's sort of the same. When you look at when you look at Lewinsky Gate a few years back, right? I hope I can use the word.
Yeah.
If Bill Clinton's getting a in the Oval Office, right? Who knew about it? Clinton, Lewinsky, Linda Tripp, and most likely Hillary. You have four people who knew about this, and yet the news broke in a year. And the same with Watergate. You know, this was a huge conspiracy that started small, and even the small stuff couldn't be kept hidden. And so there's just, I think it was Ben Franklin who said, 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. And it's the same sort of thing here, except you're talking about a huge number of people that would not possibly have kept quiet. There have been no deathbed confessions. There have just been anybody who could, I could make $1 million going on. I could go on Oprah for $1 million and say the moon landings are fake.
Okay,
nobody's done that.
I would say that this is, to me, the most compelling argument is how do you shut all those people up? And what bothers you about that argument, Joe?
Well, it is a very compelling argument. What bothers me about it is that I know that in government and especially in something as huge as NASA, things are very compartmentalized. You're not privy to all the information about the entire project that you're working on. You are given information on a need-to-know basis. If it's your job to design O-rings, you are designing O-rings. You don't get the data and the blueprints for the entire Saturn V rocket setup. You don't get all that information. The very people at the very top of the food chain knew about it. And isn't it a little odd that a couple days before Apollo 11 launched, the head of NASA resigned? Don't you find that a little odd?
Not necessarily.
That's crazy. This guy's been working on this his whole life. This is a monumental technological achievement. They're about to put a person on another planet. And this guy says, I quit. I don't want to do it anymore.
Was that James Webb?
Why do you think he would quit?
I don't know. Why do you think
Maybe because he doesn't want to be a part of a hoax.
But why didn't he come out against it?
Why do you want to get killed? I don't want to get killed. I mean, look, if you believe, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists believe that they killed Gus Grisham because he hung a lemon outside the LEM. He put a lemon on a hanger and hung it outside the lunar module. He was dead in a horrible fire shortly thereafter.
That's a very typical conspiracy claim about
But is it not true that he hung a lemon outside the lunar module? And is it not true that our government is filled with evil, murdering liars?
Our government is filled with honest,
evil,
hardworking
murdering liars at the top of the helm. There's a reason why we're in Iraq, and it's for money.
Hang on.
And people are dying for it. And it's the same people, and that's the same type of people that would be willing to kill astronauts. I'm not saying they did it, but I'm saying it's possible.
One big problem with Apollo moon hoax conspiracy theories is that a lot of stuff is stated as absolute fact, when in fact it isn't. For example...
Well, it is an absolute fact that he put a lemon on a hanger and hung it over the LEM, and it's an absolute fact that he burned to death in that very LEM.
What is hanging?
He did hang a lemon on. That was because of communications issues they were having.
He was saying this thing wasn't going to work. No.
Hang on.
He's been quoted many times as saying that the whole problem, the whole program's in jeopardy, and he didn't think it was going to work. He thought the thing was a lemon.
He didn't think the whole thing was a lemon. He was having certain issues with some of the subsystems.
If he was just having issues with subsystems, why would he publicly put a lemon on a hanger and hang it on the lunar module? That is a monstrous statement from the #1 astronaut in the country.
Yeah, Gus Grissom was a pain in the butt to a lot lot He was a loud guy, very forceful personality.
That sounds like the kind of guy I would kill.
And
if I was running things,
okay, put the EF5 word is probably better.
If I was running things,
they were doing some tests, and the communication systems weren't working right because these guys were working day in and day out, and it wasn't working right. And he got really frustrated, and he hung a lemon in there, and he was actually yelling something about how are we supposed to get to the moon if we can't talk between two buildings?
Right. Now, if they're willing to kill Gus Grisham, I'm not saying they did. If they are willing to kill Gus Grisham, would they not kill the guy with the big mouth who designs the O-rings? Of course they would.
If they're going to kill Gus Grissom and Chaffee and White as well, are they going to do it in the most publicly humiliating way that they possibly could, which almost destroyed the Apollo program and made NASA look really, really bad? Or,
2 years later, they were on the moon.
Would they have thrown a toaster in his bathtub?
It didn't even set them off for a hitch. 2 years later, they were on the moon. They showed that they could do it. They showed that if you're going to kill a guy and you're going to kill him inside the lunar module on the launch pad, that's going to show who did it.
The Apollo 1 fire was a crippling blow to NASA. It ground the program to a halt for months and months where they couldn't get any work done.
How can you say that when 24 months later they were on the moon?
I think he just conceded defeat there.
67? Who, me?
No. Joe just said 2 years later they were on the moon. But
were you saying that
2 years later they were on the moon? I think we're done. Cue the music.
Not that easy, bitch.
Because the tests that they were doing, you got to realize that the hardware was already pretty close to being finished. Now they did have to redesign the hatch, and they did have to redesign a lot of the stuff, and that slowed things down. But they were still able to put all this stuff together. And it doesn't make sense that they would kill him in such a public way.
Okay,
you throw a toaster in the guy's bathtub.
Well, I disagree entirely. I disagree entirely. They shot Kennedy in the middle of the street. I disagree entirely.
I see. I think we may be done here.
We're not done here.
I do want to get back to James Webb here for a second. James Webb was the head of NASA. He was the NASA administrator, like the way Mike Griffin is now. Now, he did not resign days before Apollo 11.
When did he
actually resigned? I looked it up in September of 1968. So it was almost an entire year before Apollo 11. Now, this was right before...
is that true? Because I read online that he resigned days before.
Well, yeah, it depends on where you read. You could read conspiracy sites. You can read stuff that's based in reality. So you got to do that too.
Well, no. I have gone way out of my way to read only pro-NASA sites that I didn't get any BS.
Well, let's see here. James Webb, NASA retired. And I should spell NASA right, because if I spell it in Bassa, I'm probably going to get something weird. JWST.nasa.gov says Webb retired just a few months before the moon landing.
That's what I'm talking about.
James Webb retired from NASA on October 7th, 1968. That's the National Air and Space Museum website. So it was about a year before Apollo 11. And the reason is because he was a Democratic appointee from, I guess, Lyndon Johnson. It might have been Kennedy. And it was looking overwhelmingly like in 68 Nixon was going to get elected. And it is very common in these situations for the heads of agencies to submit their resignation in these situations. I thought it was after the election. This was evidently right before it. But I mean,
that's a possible answer, or it could be that he didn't want to go along with a hoax. That's another possible answer.
I would agree with you if there were more compelling evidence for a hoax.
There's no need for more compelling evidence. All it does is it is circumstantial, but it does throw doubt.
Now, Joe, how many people? Just can you? You obviously can't answer this, but I'm asking for your feelings. How many people would you say would have to be in on the conspiracy, would have to know it was a lie?
That's a very good question. I have zero answer for you.
Just your feeling.
I don't know. I don't understand how it works. I don't understand how the program works. I really don't. I look at it all and I say, well, I know there was a bunch of crazy stuff that they did. I know if you know that they had a gigantic set that was a duplicate of the surface of the moon that they were practicing on, and they were taking all these videos and they were taking all these photographs. There's photographs of these guys on cranes. There's photographs of the LEM dangling from a crane. There's photographs of these guys like simulated low moon gravity where they had harnesses on and they're bouncing around on wires. There's all these photographs of this setup that they had. Now, if they were filming this setup and pretending, and there's also absolute proof that there was a satellite in orbit, and this satellite in orbit was beaming back information. They were sending it to practice what they were going to receive from the guys on the moon. Now, if they already had all this video in place, they already had all these simulation footages, and you're talking about some grainy, low-resolution stuff, that's all we have access to, how many people really did have to know? I don't know. But I think a few. I mean, it would have to be a couple dozen. It would have to be the people at the very top. Would they be able to keep their mouth shut? I don't know. I go back and forth on what people are capable of, and then I go back and forth on what people are capable of in government. Look, there's got to be a ton of people at the very top of the CFR, at the very top of the world banking, that know what's going on with globalization, that know what's going on with, the push by these banks for one gigantic global government so they can control everything. I mean, that's an absolute fact that's all going on right now. How many people know about that, and how many people are blowing the whistle? Very few. So if they can keep their mouth shut about that, they can keep their mouth shut about anything. If it's just a few dozen people, I don't know. I don't know how many people it is. And these people would think that it would be a patriotic thing to do. You're talking about the height of the Cold War. You're talking about the Red Scare. We're afraid of Russia. There was this big thing. We want to show technological superiority over the Russians, over the Soviets. So it's possible that they would do this and think that they were being patriotic doing it.
And yet the next day there was an article in the Russian newspaper that said Americans walk on the moon. And the Russians never doubted it.
I don't know. I don't know whether or not our wars with other countries, whether or not our propaganda, whether or not these arguments are all real, or whether it's the puppet on the left and the puppet on the right. I don't know who's at the helm of all this stuff. I don't know how it all works. I don't. But when I look at this whole gigantic picture, it smells.
We're going to take it on the smell. We're going to take a little break. The one you're hearing said the word smell. That's Joe Rogan, of course, the host of Fear Factor and a great stand-up, and this is a great guy. And Phil Plait, a great astronomer, is on the phone. We're talking about the moon landing. Mike Godot is sitting here. My name is Penn Jillette. We'll be back with more of this because I think clearly we're not done with either of these bitches. This is Penn Jillette, CBS Radio, Free FM. Yeah, this is Penn Jillette, CBS Radio, Free FM. I'm sitting with Michael Godot. Also, at my home is Joe Rogan, the host of Fear Factor, who just has, this is a technique for debating that should be studied. Joe has the most aggressive and yet humble style I've ever seen anyone use. It's really terrific, and he's talking to Phil Plait, who has said to me many times when I've talked to him about my friend Joe Rogan, the questions he had, just let me talk to him. We'll clear this up quickly. That's what we're trying to do. Phil, I want to give you a chance to kind of lead this because Joe's got books open here. I'm just warning you. Joe's got books open. What topic would you like to deal with on the moon landing thing next?
One of those books isn't mine, is it?
I've read all your site.
One thing about this, too, is that in a lot of conspiracy theories, the evidence is always circumstantial. And so you can say, what if this, and you can sort of what if yourself right into a corner. But with the moon landings, there is actually objective evidence and that machines went to the moon and that men went with them. And one of them is that people observed this stuff. There are levels of the conspiracy theory where they say the rocket went up and they just dumped it in the Atlantic. I actually argued with a guy. One of the guys was actually the producer of the Fox TV show, the conspiracy theory show that came out in 2001. He said that. He said the rockets never even went into space. And I laughed and said, there were people who stood on their front porches and watched the Apollo satellites passing overhead as they did that. So that doesn't work so well. But in fact, these Apollo missions like Apollo 8, as they went to the moon, they were tracked by ground-based telescopes. If you go on the web and look up Apollo 8 fuel dump, you will actually find pictures of these taken through telescopes. Mm-hmm. Ham radio operators were actually able to track these missions to the moon. And the thing about those is that's a directional signal. If the machines didn't actually go to the moon, then the ham radio operators wouldn't have been able to.
That doesn't prove that there was people.
How do the ham radio operators track this? I just don't understand the technology.
I don't either.
Okay.
I'm throwing this out there.
But you don't understand it. Then what do you mean? How can you? From what I have
read,
online,
you have to pick up
on
these
my
signals.
website.
Yeah, on your website,
on my message board. That's where you get all that.
And so,
that is where you got it, huh?
But these things. But it was also tracked by Australia. There's a very cute movie called The Dish, which is not hugely historically accurate. It's like a collection of a bunch of different things that really happened and all kind of slapped together.
But Phil, I got to stop you right there.
But in fact, the Australians had their telescopes viewing this. And you could say, well, maybe this just means that we sent rockets to the moon.
Because we did.
But then the thing gets a little bit more complicated, because one thing that the Apollo astronauts did, several of them did, and they did this on Apollo 11, is they left things on the moon like these retro reflectors.
So did the Soviets. The Soviets did it twice, with Lunkahood and Lunkahood 2, with unmanned lunar probes. They left 2 laser reflectors, and you could send a laser up to right now.
The laser
2.
reflectors,
one of them's functional, one of them doesn't work so well.
I think one of them got covered with dust or didn't get placed correctly or something like that. And
so that proves nothing.
For the Russians,
that's the same thing as same thing as the moon rocks argument.
Hang on. When you are putting one of these things on the moon, if you know you're going to be putting it with a robot, then you have to design it so that it has a fail-safe, so that it gets put in there correctly, or you have some way of watching over it so you know the robot's doing this correctly. If you're just going to do this with people, and these things look like giant ice cube racks. They're just like huge.
Yeah, I've seen them. But Phil, the brand designer.
These aren't people in a sweatshop sewing,
no, they're scientists.
Clothes.
They're scientists.
Well,
these are top engineers, and they're managers and managers above them that integrate all this stuff together.
I hate to help Joe on this, but on the Challenger, Richard Feynman did point out very clearly on the O-rings that there was a problem with too strong a hierarchy at NASA, and that people at the bottom were not speaking up and did not have communication up to the top there.
Yeah, and that's what, 1989? Was that?
I know this would be a quiz.
Challenger was 86. This 86?
Yeah, I just graduated high school. You're right.
I'm blanking. I think it was 86. But that's when there was a problem in the pieces they were making.
Right.
And so what I'm not saying that people aren't going to report it. I'm saying that what this does is this opens up all of these managers who are in charge of this thing would have been able to see that there was a problem. It's not that there was an upwards whistleblowing hierarchy that was stifling people from talking. It's just that you're just involving more and more people in on this conspiracy, and at some point conspiracies fall apart of their own weight.
Now, Joe, I want to ask you a question that you touch upon all the time, and you jump right to evil and wars and this kind of stuff. But on a little more lower level, what is really the motive here? I mean, if you have nuclear bombs, you can bomb them back into the Stone Age, and you have all these missiles, why show off to the world that we can land a man on the moon?
I think to win the Cold War, or to try to give some sort of perceived victory in the Cold War, perceived victory of technological superiority over the Soviet Union. And I don't know whether or not it happened. I still am not convinced one way or another. But you are certainly not convincing me that we went, not by any stretch of the imagination, especially since the last time anybody even did a flyby of the moon was 1972. That's
correct.
Silly.
That was Apollo 17.
That's silly.
Now, Phil, how much would it cost? I mean, just ballpark. How much would it cost now in 2007 to send Joe to the moon? If we got together with the Amazon guy and all that.
Well, lacking Jackie Gleason to actually hit him to the moon. I don't know. I mean, the people who are putting together these rockets, like Jeff Bezos with Amazon and Berenson and Spaceship One, these are all rockets that are being designed to go into low Earth orbit, and it takes a huge amount more to get to the moon. You basically have to double the energy you give to the rocket to get it from low Earth orbit to the moon, and that means a vast amount more fuel, and that's why it took a rocket like the Saturn V, which was this enormous beast, to get up there. And so, you know, to do this, we're basically starting from scratch. We could rebuild the Saturn V. We could do all that. But the technology is a lot better now, so it's better just to start from scratch.
But wait a minute. Why would you start from scratch if you already did it successfully 6 times out of 7 attempts? Apollo 13 being the only one that didn't land on the moon. Well, if that's 1969 technology, I mean, wouldn't just small improvements?
Well, no, I mean, you've got the knowledge of what happened then, but the technology itself has gotten a lot better.
The Apollo landings are the only technological achievement in human history that is not easier, cheaper, and faster to duplicate than it was in 1969.
Well, NASA is a government agency.
That's not good enough. That's craziness. They take the space shuttle up all the time. Not only that, the space shuttle is more expensive, and it's not as powerful as a Saturn V rocket.
You got to realize that NASA has to bend to government will. The space shuttle was never meant to be initially the way it is now. What is it? Is a platypus? Is a mouse designed by the government? You know, the space station was originally supposed to be lean and mean, and it's going to do all these things. But then every congressman wanted his fingers in it. You know, we're going to build this here in my district, and then it got huge, and it cost hundreds of billions. And it's
we're not talking about the space station. We're talking about the space shuttle.
And the shuttle's the same way. Now, what happened, you know...
But the shuttle goes up all the time.
Yeah?
They wouldn't do one flyby of the moon? They couldn't figure out a way... Why would they go backwards?
It's not because it's not designed to go to the moon.
But no human being ever, since the Apollo astronauts, has gone more than 400 miles up.
That's about right, yeah.
That's ridiculous. 260,000 miles there and back, and the best they can do since 1972 is 400 miles?
Yeah. And now, while you're saying it's ridiculous because you can't believe it, I think it's ridiculous because I can believe it very well.
But it's not like they're not spending money. And they keep talking about going back, but they talk about going back in 2020. Why go back in 2020 when you could just... That's the other problem. They don't have the telemetry data from the Apollo 11. Isn't that like the most important data? Isn't that like the most important thing? A huge technological achievement. They landed a man on the moon, brought him back, and they're missing the telemetry data? 14,000 something reels?
They're missing a lot of that stuff was not
because you can't fake it. You can't fake the telemetry data.
One of the things that's most irritating about this conspiracy theory for someone like me is that a lot of this stuff is really subtle and complicated. And
14,000 reels of telemetry data for the most technological achievement in human history that's not stored in the Smithsonian Institute. It's not stored in NASA Vault. It's not labeled. It's not under lock and key. It's not in a gold vault. There's nothing weird about that.
I can't say anything about 14,000 reels. I don't know the number, and so
yeah, it's like 13,000 or 14,000. I forget.
I know
Either way,
a lot of the
it's
original,
more than 100, which is crazy.
Has been lost.
You've lost more. If you lost more than 100 of the telemetry data, that's insane.
A lot of the stuff was owned by contractors. It was shelved. They weren't paid to store it, and it went
NASA.
away.
It's NASA. NASA lost it. This is the hard footage.
NASA is not just NASA. NASA is civil servants. NASA is 10 different contractors. There was Northrop Grumman. There was North American.
Nice. Yeah, Grumman lost all their stuff. So did Boeing. They lost all their information too on the moon buggy, on the lunar module. They lost all that stuff.
This is
how convenient.
It's another argument brought up by conspiracy theorists. Not to me. Each one of these missions, each one of these lunar landers was different. It's not like they designed a car and then just cranked them out. they had an overall design, and then each one was different. Each one they had to note all of these changes and everything, and it was all done on paper.
I got to tell you, Phil, I'm not done with you, bitch. This is again, we haven't even got into solar flares. The apex of a 20-year solar cycle happened while the Apollo landings were going on. Those people would have fried up there, baby.
This is Rocky. This is Rocky. Joe did not have a chance. Joe is holding his own. Yes, there has to be another installment. Joe Rogan, Phil Plait, CBS Radio. This is Penn, Jillette.
If I went for NASA, I'd fire you, bro.
Good thing I don't work for NASA.